This is the community of Grayson, California, a town of 1,300 people tucked between almond orchards and dairy farms, where the San Joaquin and Tuolumne rivers converge. When devastating floods swept California in January, Grayson survived without major damage. In the minds of some townspeople and experts, that was thanks partly to the 2,100 acres of former farmland just across the river that have been largely restored to a natural floodplain. Much of the Central Valley of California was once a vast wetland until 20th century engineering bent nature to its will. The projects that rerouted floodwaters enabled the economic boom, but foreshadowed today's issues of endangered fish and salinated soil. Then came the effects of climate change.
As of the end of 2022, everybody was in drought relief mindset, right? We've got a crisis where hundreds and thousands of wells have gone dry. But then what the storms of January showed us is that the state also has this backlog of flood safety issues that only come up as a priority once the disaster has already happened.
Those floods were the first major test for this area since the landscape was reshaped by degrading levees and restored with natural plant species. River Partners led the $50 million project, buying the land from private owners and reviving the natural floodplain with the help of about 40 volunteers from Grayson. David Guzman, who works in an almond processing plant and lives right up against a slough of the San Joaquin River, was one of those volunteers.
It means a whole lot to me because it doesn't flood out no more like it used to.
As severe as the recent storms were, they amount to less than half of what could fall within a potential arc storm. The biblical-sounding name stands for Atmospheric River 1000, a megastorm that would likely exceed that of the Great Flood of 1862, which inundated an area of 300 miles long and 20 miles wide in the Central Valley. Experts like UCLA climate scientist Daniel Swain, who made a presentation to the California State Assembly in early February, say climate change is making such an event likelier with each passing year.
The cumulative risk of seeing an arc historical level event, which again would be about 20 to 30% larger than what we just saw, is now greater than about 65%. So essentially there's about a 2 in 3 chance of seeing an event that is about 20 or 30% larger than what we just experienced over the next 40 years or so.
Advocates for floodplain restoration say it can help solve California's dual dangers of flooding and drought by enabling floodwaters to meander across the plain and recharge the aquifer below.
We have more space for the water to spread out, and we've modified some of the components of the flood system here so that the water surface elevations are lower for neighborhoods like Grayson, or even for our neighbors downstream in Stockton.
It is impossible to determine for certain that the floodplain saved Grayson, but experts say restoration can help spare adjacent towns, improve water quality, and restore the health of native fish populations, allowing them to rest and fatten up in floodplains before returning to the fast-moving rivers. River Partners has restored 20,000 acres on some 200 sites over the past 25 years at the cost of $185 million. It has identified another 100,000 acres, but many potential projects are blocked by development. The city of Stockton, downriver from Grayson, is built on an expansive inland delta, an area particularly susceptible to flooding. Barbara Barragan-Perea, the executive director of grassroots outreach group Restore the Delta, says floodplain restoration funding is needed to save lives.
There are 17,000 homes behind us that were redlined into floodplain housing 40, 50, 60 years ago. This levee is inadequate, and levees alone aren't going to do the trick. We want to invest in levees throughout the system, but for major arc storms, we have to have floodplains where we can have water spillover so that we take the pressure off levees and save people's lives.
But floodplain restoration spending was cut in California Governor Gavin Newsom's 2023-2024 budget, published in January. That included $40 million of funding for 9 River Partners projects throughout the San Joaquin Valley, an area especially vulnerable to the drought-flood dynamic. The Central Valley Flood Protection Plan, drawn up by a state agency, calls for investing $360 to $560 million annually in flood management. The state is currently spending about $250 million. That sum compares with $5 to $7 billion in losses that Moody's estimated statewide from the recent storms.